Eisenhower called Andrew Higgins, which developed the LCVP, the man who won the war.
Hello, and welcome to Curious World History. My name is Colleen.
And my name's Albert.
Albert, we're going to talk about something pretty interesting today.
Yeah.
Actually, we're always talking about something that I find to be pretty interesting, but today we're going to talk about an experience that we had in New Orleans. What is the experience we had?
The World War II Museum.
Are you saving old newspapers, magazines, paper bags, and boxes? Paper is a vital war material, and there's a serious shortage. Sell your waste paper or give it to a local charity. And now we move out of the theater and into the street.
The World War II Museum. So I have been to a lot of museums in my life, as you could imagine.
Mm-hmm.
I've been to museums in different countries, in different cities. I think this was the best run museum that I've ever been to. And one of the things that I would love to encourage our listeners to do before we even begin is to hire a docent. Do you know what a docent is?
No.
It's a museum guide. So it's the person who will give tours. And the nice thing about hiring a docent is they will bring you through the highlights of the museum. You can always go back through.
Yeah.
But with a museum that has a ton of information and stuff in it, it can be very overwhelming. I get overwhelmed after at least an hour. I think that at that point, I just want to go get something to eat.
And it was 2 hours.
And this was a 2-hour tour, but it didn't feel like a long tour because she was bringing us to all the interesting stuff. So why don't you begin by telling us some of the things that you learned? What were some of the highlights that you found fascinating? You took a ton of pictures.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's important to keep in mind.
So when we went in, we saw a LCVP landing craft.
An LCVP landing craft. And are these landing craft somehow related to New Orleans?
They were made there.
They are shrimp boats originally.
Shrimp boat?
Yeah. So shrimping or shrimp fishing is something that is important to Louisiana. So because of that, the company that built those boats that are famous for landing on the beaches of Normandy were actually originally built with the design of being shrimp boats.
Wow.
In New Orleans. And that's why the World War II Museum is there in New Orleans.
Okay. And it can carry 36 men.
Mm-hmm.
Eisenhower called Andrew Higgins, which developed the LCVP, the man who won the war.
That's right, because they called them Higgins boats, right?
Mm-hmm.
And because of the Higgins boat, they were able to land on Normandy in such great numbers that it allowed them to help turn the tide of the war.
Yeah. And then we saw a big plane. It's called the Douglas C-47 Skytrain.
Okay.
It was painted with black and white D-Day stripes for identification.
Do you know why they did that? Why they painted it that way?
No.
Because they had problems with friendly fire. Have you ever heard of that term before?
Mm-hmm.
What does it mean?
When you, shoot down your own.
That's right. So they had a problem where they were accidentally shooting down their own planes sometimes. So they started to decide to paint them a specific way. And that way it was easier to identify that it was your own plane that was coming and not the enemy plane.
Mm-hmm. And it dropped thousands of paratroopers into Normandy in the hours before the beach landing.
Down went the gunner, a bullet was his fate. Down went the gunner, and then the gunner's mate. Up jumped the sky pilot, gave the boys a look, and manned the gun himself as he laid beside the book, shouting, "Praise the Lord, pass the ammunition, praise the Lord."
Japan had 1 million troops by 1939.
Okay. And how many troops did the U.S. have at that point?
400,000.
Yeah, so there was a problem because both Japan and Germany were preparing for war. They were building up their military, and the U.S. was not. Do you know why the U.S. wasn't building up their military at that time?
Because they didn't need anything?
They didn't. Well, the U.S. had other big problems internally at the time. So there were a couple of big ones. But one, there was a financial crisis. where Wall Street crashed, the stock market crashed. So a lot of people were without money and they were without jobs and they were having to stand in line to try to get food, right? It was a tough time. And then the second thing that happened was the Dust Bowl. So that was where farming practices led to challenges with when there was a drought that came through. They lost a lot of farming, and there was just all of this earth, this dust that was getting kicked up into the air in the Midwest, and it was causing a lot of problems. So there were two major challenges they needed to fix internally. One was financial, and another one sort of had to do with a major ecological crisis. So they were not interested in going into another world war. They were trying to avoid that.
Yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
After Pearl Harbor, the U.S. and our allies prioritized defeating Germany first. Even as Japan swept through the Pacific, the turning point came at Midway, where U.S. code breakers exposed Yamanote's plan. Admiral Nimitz ambushed the Japanese fleet and sank 4 carriers and a heavy cruiser. Meanwhile, Doolittle's raid launched 16 B-25s from the USS Hornet and struck 6 Japanese cities. Minimal physical damage, but a massive psychological blow. By the war's end, U.S. Navy carrier strength grew from 8 to 140. Submarine strength from 120 to 212.
So that was in the Pacific. What other areas in the Pacific became important battles? Do you remember?
Guadalcanal.
Guadalcanal. You know what I remember about the museum's exhibit on Guadalcanal? Is that when you stepped into it, it was dark.
Yeah.
And there was fake foliage, like plants overhead, and it felt like you were entering into a jungle.
Yeah.
I thought that was amazing.
We also saw 2, turret.
Gun turrets?
Yeah, gun turrets.
Mm-hmm.
One was an anti-tank gun, and the other one was a 30 caliber water-cooled machine gun.
Interesting. So this is water-cooled. Do you have any idea why they might need to cool a machine gun?
Because it gets hot when you fire it.
That's right. You don't want it to melt down or explode or something like that, right?
And then at Guadalcanal in August 1942, America's first major amphibious landing used Higgins-built craft to seize a strategic airfield.
That's right. So they used those shrimp boats, basically, that shrimp boat design to land also at Guadalcanal, which was a big deal. Why was Guadalcanal so important? Do you know?
So they could get to Japan.
That's right. It was an island, right? It was an important place where they could position themselves to be able to refuel and head over to Japan.
From September 13th to 14th in 1942, Japanese forces rushed reinforcements to Guadalcanal, determined to drive Americans off the island. Low on supplies, the Americans held on with their meager air force. During a major 2-night Japanese assault, Marines tenaciously held the ridge bordering Henderson Field. Marine riders, paratroopers, and artillerymen repelled hundreds in close, savage fighting. Breaking the assault at what became known as Bloody Ridge, 700 to 850 Japanese and 59 Americans died there.
So one of the problems they had at Guadalcanal was not even related to the fighting. It was related to the disease that happens when you're in a jungle. And so one of the things that I learned when we were at the museum is that for every 1 American man who was killed in battle, 5 died from disease or starvation.
Yeah.
Pretty scary.
Japanese forces massed for an all-out assault while Americans finally received fresh reinforcements, including U.S. Army soldiers. Americans strengthened Henderson's field defense and launched aggressive counterattacks. The Japanese 17th Army struck on October 23, 1942, at multiple points over 4 days, but Marines and soldiers threw back every attack. Japanese losses were devastating. The struggle for Guadalcanal would now shift to the sea. At sea, both sides lost so many ships that the waters around Guadalcanal became known as Iron Bottom Sound. The naval campaign was costly for both sides, but ultimately, the U.S. gained control.
So they won Guadalcanal in battle, and they were able to use it now. They used Henderson Field to position their troops to be able to push farther. Do you know of somebody in particular who was stationed at Guadalcanal after the ground fighting?
Your grandfather?
My grandfather, that's right, William Joseph Barry. He was an operational mechanic. The ones we think he was taking care of were very small dive bomber planes. And so he was taking care of those planes there so that they could try to push the Japanese back toward Japan.
Mm-hmm. The Asia-Pacific War was largely a jungle war, and the Solomons, New Guinea, the Philippines, Burma, and the Marianas. Americans gradually adopted learning new tactics and weapons, including flamethrowers, to fight effectively in the brutal environment.
Very true.
They also made a glove pistol. It was designed for underwater demolition teams and combat swimmers. It was basically just a gun on a glove.
That's right. So it was meant for close combat, right? Mm-hmm. So if you were super close to somebody and you punched them, the gun would go off. Also, Julia Child, this is before her culinary career, so she is famous as being a chef, and she worked for the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, which was sort of like the predecessor to the CIA. She created something that was a shark repellent cake, and it protected downed pilots and underwater explosives from sharks coming after them.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty neat, right? One of the other inventions that I thought was pretty interesting was actually, believe it or not, M&Ms, the chocolate candy.
M&M?
Yes. When you were trying to give soldiers like some small amount of chocolate as a little bit of something joyful while they were in these very awful circumstances, the chocolate would melt. So instead, they did these little bits of chocolate coated in candy, and that way it didn't melt on them.
Japan seized the Philippines in 1942. For 2 years, Filipino guerrillas resisted while American POWs waited for rescue.
Guerrilla warfare is actually unconventional little war strategy where small mobile groups of irregular fighters use stealth, hit-and-run tactics. So rather than it being like a big coordinated military effort, it is sort of like small, more creative ways of fighting.
In 1944, U.S. forces returned, nearly destroying Japan's navy at Leyte. When Allies invaded Leyte on October 20th, 1944, Japan launched a massive three-pronged naval counterattack. Japan's carriers lured Halsey's fleet away, leaving only a small U.S. escort force, Taffy 3, to hold the line. They did, and a second Japanese force was destroyed. Initial landings on Luzon met little resistance, but Japan rushed 45,000 reinforcements inland. Americans isolated them with additional landings, seized Mindoro as an air base, then landed on Luzon on January 9th, 1945, driving toward Manila. American forces reached Manila in early February 1945. Japanese naval troops defied orders to retreat and turned the city into a fortress. The month-long battle leveled most of Manila and ended with staggering losses: 1,000 Americans and 16,000 Japanese, and up to 100,000 Filipino civilians killed.
Wow. That's a horrible amount of people. I think one of the things that kept coming up as we were going through that museum is how many lives were affected. And it was American soldiers, absolutely, and it was the people who loved them and cared for them, but it was also all of the people in other countries who were going through this as well. Mm-hmm. And one of the stories that stayed with me was a soldier's journal and his other belongings. And there was a picture of him with his girlfriend in the front. This was a young man. I think he was in his late teens, so like 18 or 19 years old. And unfortunately, what happened was he died in the war. And his journal was given by his family eventually to this amazing museum. And this elderly woman back in, I think it was 2013, was going through the museum with her family, and they get to that exhibit, and she sees her picture in his journal because that was her boyfriend. And she tells the docent, "That was my boyfriend. I knew him." And so the docent stops the tour and gets one of the historians to come over, and the historian takes her into a private room and takes the journal and brings it over and shows it to her page after page. And one of the things that was in there was that he said, "If anything ever happens to me, I want this journal to go to her." And so the historian at that point closed the journal and handed it to her and said, "This belongs to you." Mm-hmm. And she decided, because of her age and because she thought it could do more good in a museum, that she would donate the journal back to the museum. There were several times in that museum where I saw how affected people were from that. My grandmother worried that my grandfather wasn't going to come home. So that's what war does. It creates that there are people who have to sacrifice everything.
On April 1st, 1945, over 50,000 troops stormed Okinawa. That stopped before mainland Japan. After an easy start, savage fighting erupted in the south. Nearly 3 months of brutal combat made clear that invading Japan itself would be catastrophic. Japan entered 1945, battered by bombing raids and naval blockades, yet refusing to surrender. The U.S. planned Operation Downfall, a massive invasion of Kyushu set for November 1st, 1945. Instead, the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki ended the war.
That's right. And I have a great uncle, so that would be my mother's uncle, who was among the first troops who landed at Nagasaki. And I can't even begin to imagine the horrors that they saw. But I think part of what you said there and what I learned during this visit to the museum is that the Japanese people were so loyal to their leader that they were willing to sacrifice everything. So even civilians were willing to enter combat without being part of the official military. And so it ended up setting the table for a very difficult decision by the U.S., where the U.S. opted to drop atomic bombs in areas where there were lots of civilians. Mm-hmm. And it led to people being killed. Yeah. So it was an awful, awful thing. War is a terrible thing for people. And I think it's the worst of humanity. And I'm very sad whenever a country or any group of people ends up in a position where they believe that war is the only answer. Well, thank you, Albert. This has been a very tough episode in some ways.
And the next episode, we're going to cover...
We'll cover more of Europe, right? Which we've talked about before, but there were a couple of other areas that we did not discuss that we learned much more about. Yeah. One that actually is related to a good friend of mine. Okay, so before we leave, I thought it would be interesting to share with the listeners that we have now had listeners in 40 countries and 41 different states within the United States. That's impressive, Albert.
Yeah.
Clearly, you have tapped into something that a lot of people are interested in. Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much for this time today, Albert.
You're welcome. This is Curious About History.